A hush settled over the grand assembly hall of the Galactic Council, an uneasy silence broken only by the faint hum of the hovering luminescent spheres that lit the vast chamber. The air was thick with the scent of polished stone and metallic alloys, mingling with the subtle musk of various alien species seated in their respective dignitary platforms. Towering figures with translucent skin, reptilian beings adorned in ceremonial armor, and chitinous diplomats clacking their mandibles in disinterest, all present, yet unconcerned. In the center of it all stood Mulek, his aged form draped in the heavy ceremonial robes of the Zenkar Dominion. His pale, leathery skin bore the ridges of time, deep creases forming along his elongated brow. Once, his voice had commanded the attention of this very chamber, but now it was little more than an afterthought among the Council's young and eager war strategists. Still he spoke. "They do not fear war," he said, his voice carrying despite its weariness. "And that is why you will lose?" A scoff came from the leftmost dais, where General Carvos of the Virun Empire sat reclined in his gilded seat, Talon fingers drumming against the armrest. The general's crimson eyes gleamed with amusement, his serpentine lips curling into a smirk. "You overestimate them, Malik," Carvos said, his voice laced with condescension. "The humans are a young race. Their military is primitive, their technology laughable compared to the might of the Council's fleets. What possible threat could they pose?" Malik exhaled slowly. He had expected this reaction. He had expected arrogance. It was the same arrogance that had doomed 1,000 civilizations before, and it would be the same arrogance that would see the Council shattered. "I have walked among them," he continued, his tired eyes scanning the chamber. "I have seen their history, their wars. Wars they did not seek, but when forced upon them, they ended with terrifying finality. You mistake their diplomacy for weakness, their restraint for hesitation. It is not. It is calculation." Carvos let out a sharp laugh, a sound that rippled through the assembly as others chuckled in agreement. Even Chancellor Zervana, seated upon the high throne of the Council, offered only a faint smile of amusement. Malik turned his gaze to the Chancellor. "You, above all, should understand. Our people, too, once thought war was a tool to be wielded, a hammer to bring order to chaos. And yet the humans, unremarkable, fragile creatures that they are, have made war an art, a necessity, a thing to be endured, survived, and when the moment comes, unleashed without hesitation." The Chancellor's amusement faded. She was an old ruler, long past the days of foolish bravado, yet even she did not seem fully convinced. She laced her fingers together, her blue-hued skin glistening beneath the glow of the chamber's lighting. "If they are as dangerous as you claim," she said evenly, "then why have they not yet struck? If war is their true nature, why do they not claim dominion as so many other empires have?" Malik shook his head. "Because humans do not fight for conquest. They fight for survival. And when they fight, they do so with the resolve of a species that has known extinction was always one misstep away." Silence followed. Then Carvos leaned forward, amusement gone, replaced by thinly veiled impatience. "Enough of this," he snarled. "The Council has already convened. The humans have refused to surrender their outer colonies. We have given them every chance to submit, and they have rebuffed our emissaries at every turn. Their arrogance will be their undoing." Malik's fingers curled into fists beneath the folds of his robe. "You misunderstand them still. The humans do not see your emissaries as diplomats. They see them as the precursor to invasion. And they are correct." Zervana exhaled, considering. "The decision has already been made. The Council has voted to proceed with the Virun campaign." Malik's throat tightened. "Then you are all fools." A murmur rippled through the assembly, scandalized whispers carrying through the chamber. It was a dangerous thing to insult the Council so openly, but Malik no longer cared. He had played his role for too long, watched as species older and mightier than humanity fell to their own hubris. He had no intention of witnessing it again. Enough. Zervana's voice carried over the clamor, silencing the murmurs with a single word. She regarded Mullick with something akin to pity. "You have served the Council well, Ambassador, but your time is over. Humanity will be dealt with as all lesser species are. Your warnings are noted, but they are unnecessary." Mullick stood there for a long moment, his body heavy with the weight of knowing. Then he straightened, his old bones aching with emotion. "I resign my position," he said. "I will take no part in this." The Chancellor did not protest. The decision had been made. As Mullick turned to leave, his gaze swept the room one final time. He saw the faces of those who had once been his allies, his colleagues. They were already looking past him, their discussions moving on to matters of military strategy, fleet deployment, planetary occupation. They did not understand. They never would. Outside, in the dim corridors of the Council's towering citadel, he found himself facing a lone human figure. Tall, with an air of quiet confidence, the man stood with his hands clasped behind his back, clad in the formal uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Commander Nathaniel Gray regarded Mullick with calm, unreadable eyes. "They did not listen," Gray said, though it was not a question. Mullick let out a dry chuckle, one absent of any humor. "No, they did not." Gray nodded, as if he had expected nothing else. "Then it begins." Mullick studied the man before him, noting the relaxed posture, the steady breathing. No tension, no fear. "You already knew this was coming," the old ambassador said. Gray's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it was cold, detached. "We did." Mullick hesitated before speaking again. "And what will humanity do?" Gray's smile faded. He met Mullick's gaze without a flicker of uncertainty. "We will do what we always do." Then, without another word, the human turned and disappeared into the corridor's shadows. Mullick stood there for a long time before he exhaled, his breath unsteady. He had done all he could, and now the galaxy would learn. The Vieirun fleet emerged from the void like a tidal wave of obsidian and crimson, blotting out the stars over the human colony of New Alexandria. Hundreds of warships hovered in perfect formation, their polished hulls reflecting the dim light of the system's aging sun. Their presence alone should have been enough to force a surrender. After all, no species had ever withstood the might of the Galactic Council's combined forces. And yet, the humans did not surrender. Grand Admiral Jorvash stood at the command dais of the flagship Dominion's Wrath, his talons clicking rhythmically against the console's surface. He studied the barren surface of the planet below, its cities dark, its orbital defenses offline. No attempt at evacuation, no distress signals, no military resistance. The humans had done nothing. A trap? No, it couldn't be. The Council's intelligence reports had been clear. New Alexandria was an outpost world, hardly fortified, lightly defended, and of little strategic value. The humans had to know they couldn't win. The only logical response was surrender, and yet nothing. Jorvash exhaled through flaring nostrils and turned to his second-in-command, Commander Irvin. "Proceed with the bombardment. Target population centers first. Let them see what defiance earns them." Irvin hesitated. He was a loyal officer, but there was an unease in his posture. "Sir, should we not give them one last chance to comply?" Jorvash narrowed his reptilian eyes. "We have already given them more chances than they deserve." With a nod, Irvin relayed the command. Seconds later, the ship's cannons hummed with stored energy, and then the first volley descended. Lances of plasma fire streaked through the atmosphere, striking the human cities in precise, calculated bursts. Fire bloomed in the darkness, illuminating the world in a sickly red glow. Buildings vaporized in an instant, steel and concrete melting like wax. Still, the humans did nothing. Jorvash's jaw tightened. Something was wrong. There should have been a reaction by now. Some desperate counterattack, some attempt at diplomacy, even cries for mercy. Yet the human channels remained silent. A sudden alarm blared to the command deck, pulling Jorvash from his thoughts. "Proximity alert," a technician barked. Something's coming out of FDL, multiple signatures. Jorvash turned sharply to the main display. A cluster of red dots flickered into existence on the holographic battlefield. Small and fast-moving. Human ships, but not warships. They were unarmed civilian freighters. He sneered. What kind of pathetic? Then he saw the trajectory. The freighters weren't maneuvering. They weren't broadcasting distress calls. They were accelerating, directly toward the Vieruan fleet. Impact alert, another officer shouted. Jorvash's mind caught up an instant too late. His mouth opened to scream an order, but the first collision had already begun. The freighters hit like meteors, each one packed with nuclear payloads, detonating on impact. The Dominion's wrath rocked violently, alarm screeching as debris from the first line of the fleet burst into cascading fireballs. One after another, the freighters rammed into the fleet, each detonation shattering warships that had never been designed for such reckless, suicidal tactics. No and oh! Shields at full power. Deploy countermeasures. Jorvash bellowed, gripping the railing as the ship lurched again. But it was too late. The humans had sacrificed their own in the opening move of the battle. And it had worked. In less than a minute, the entire forward assault line of the Vieruan fleet had been crippled. Jorvash staggered upright, fumes and sparks filling the bridge. Panic rippled through his officers, but he refused to let fear show. Status report. Commander Irvin wiped away blood from a gash on his temple. His voice was strained. We've lost 30 capital ships. The human ships, whatever they were, they had mass-enhanced nuclear warheads. They overwhelmed our shields. Jorvash clenched his fists. He had never heard of a species willingly sending unarmed civilians to their deaths as a first strike. It was madness. No! It was something worse than madness. It was war. A new set of alarms shrieked through the ship, and the main screen flared with new movement. This time, they weren't civilian ships. A human fleet had arrived, smaller than the Vieruan Armada, but moving with terrifying efficiency. Their black-hulled vessels spread out in a formation that was neither offensive nor defensive. It was predatory. The humans had waited. They had let the Vieruan Empire commit to an attack, let them believe it would be easy. And now, when the fleet was bloodied and disorganized, they struck. Return fire. Jorvash roared. The Vieruan ships adjusted, launching their own barrage toward the human fleet. Plasma bursts and ion lances arced through the darkness, but the humans moved unpredictably, weaving through the firestorm like hunters on the prowl. Then their weapons fired. Not plasma, not the elegant, refined energy weapons of the Council's forces. No! The humans used something far worse. Kinetic rounds. Simple, brutal, unstoppable. They didn't try to burn through shields. They punched straight through them, massive tungsten slugs traveling at relativistic speeds. The first impact sent a shockwave through space as a Vieruan cruiser split in half. Another round shredded a dreadnought's bridge, killing its command crew instantly. Jorvash's hands trembled on the console. He had fought wars before. He had crushed rebellions. He had seen death. But this was something else. The humans did not fight like an empire. They fought like executioners. The battle raged for another hour, but the outcome had already been decided in the first 5 minutes. The Vieruan forces, once so confident, had no countermeasure against human unpredictability. They had been taught war as a careful dance of strategy, formations, and calculated strikes. The humans fought as though the only rule was survival, and they were winning. Jorvash could see it in his officers' eyes. The same realization dawned upon them all. The humans had not been silent because they feared war. They had been silent because they had been preparing for it. Another explosion rocked the Dominion's wrath, and Jorvash grabbed the nearest console, his vision swimming. The fleet was in full retreat. No orders had been given. His soldiers were running, fleeing through space like prey scattering before a predator's shadow. The Grand Assembly would demand answers. They would call for retribution. But Jorvash knew, in the depths of his being, that the war was already lost. The humans would not negotiate. They would not stop. They had given their warning. And now, they would teach the Council what it meant to ignore it. The silence that followed the massacre at New Alexandria was worse than any declaration of war. Across the Galactic Council's core worlds, the news spread like wildfire, whispered in hushed voices behind closed doors. The mighty Vierun Empire, heralded as the Council's military backbone, had been gutted. 30 capital ships lost, entire fleets in retreat, and the humans had barely revealed their hand. General Carvo stood in the dimly lit war chamber of the Council's strategic headquarters, his taloned fingers pressed into the cold metal of the holographic display. The map before him flickered with blinking red and blue markers. Red for the Council's forces, blue for the humans. The red clusters still outnumbered the blue in sheer volume, but it didn't matter. The blues moved with precision, unpredictability, and worst of all, an eerie silence. The humans weren't engaging in open war. They were hunting. Carvos exhaled sharply, turning to the assembled high commanders, their expressions grim, their confidence from weeks prior shattered. "We must retaliate immediately," he growled. "Show them we are not afraid. They're not fighting for territory," Chancellor Zervana said from the end of the table. Her voice, always coldly regal, now carried an undertone of unease. "What is there to retaliate against? They are ghosts. They strike, they disappear. They are not waging war. They are erasing our ability to fight one." Carvo straightened, jaw tightening. "Then we must force them into open conflict." Zervana met his gaze with tired eyes. "And how do you propose we do that?" No one spoke. The war was slipping beyond their control. The humans had not sent fleets to conquer worlds. They had not occupied territory or made demands. Instead, they had dismantled the Council's supply lines, severing trade routes in a matter of weeks. Fuel stations, shipyards, communication relays, each one eliminated with surgical precision, not in grand battles, but in sudden, ruthless ambushes that left no survivors. Carvos clenched his fists, his mind racing. It was unlike any war he had ever fought. The enemy did not behave like soldiers. They did not seek honor or prestige. They simply removed anything that could be used against them. And now, the Council's fleets drifted half-starved in the void, unable to coordinate, unable to reinforce each other. The first true panic took root when the Jorg Kal 5 massacre was broadcast across Council space. A fleet of 500 warships had been deployed there, a show of force meant to draw the humans into battle. They had arrived, waiting in the vast asteroid field, confident that any human force would be crushed beneath their superior numbers. But the humans never engaged them directly. Instead, the shadows of the asteroid belt came alive. Autonomous drone ships, silent and hidden, picked off the stragglers first. There were no massive fleet engagements, no grand charges. One by one, vessels vanished from the fleet's formation, their signals snuffed out without so much as a distress call. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. They tried to retreat. The humans didn't allow it. Their weapons weren't designed for prolonged battles. They struck like executioners, massive kinetic slugs fired from railgun platforms stationed on the very asteroids they had ignored. Ship after ship was torn apart by unseen fire, their crews screaming into the void before their signals went dark. It took 6 hours for the fleet to be reduced to wreckage. When the first distress calls finally reached the Council, there was nothing left but static. The survivors, what few remained, were found weeks later, drifting in escape pods, their eyes hollow, their bodies weak from starvation. They spoke of whispers in their comms, of distress signals mimicked in their own voices, leading them into ambush after ambush. They spoke of dead ships, their lights flickering, as if something watched from the darkness before striking. They spoke of a horror that wasn't war, but something worse. The humans had let them live, not out of mercy, but as a message. Carvo slammed a fist onto the table. "We are being humiliated." None of the other commanders met his gaze. They all knew the truth. The council had gone to war, believing they were the superior force. But superiority meant nothing when fighting an enemy that did not play by the rules. The next message from humanity arrived 3 days later, not through diplomatic channels, not through intercepted transmissions. It arrived directly in the capital's central data core, bypassing every security measure the council had. A simple sentence, displayed across every screen, every military console, every public communication system across council space. You declared war. We accepted. Panic gripped the council. Carvos ordered immediate security lockdowns, mass purges of data cores, full system resets. Nothing worked. The message remained, a silent reminder that the humans were already inside their systems. The council ordered emergency countermeasures. They began sending their fleets to random locations, patrolling at random intervals. But it did not help. The humans were already there. Council-supplied convoys never made it to their destinations. Orbital defense stations found themselves locked out of their own controls. Powerless as human strike teams boarded and disabled them. Entire colonies fell silent overnight, their cities left standing, but every strategic asset destroyed, every military officer executed. And still, the humans did not claim territory. They were not conquerors. They did not want to rule. They only wanted the council to understand one thing. There would be no negotiation. By the time Carvos truly understood, it was far too late. He sat in the war chamber, staring at the new reports. Entire fleets missing. Supply depots gone. Council-held space shrinking. Not because the humans were taking it, but because the council itself was withering away. "We should attempt to make peace," one of the lesser admirals finally whispered. Carvos looked up sharply. "No, but they will not accept peace," he said, voice low, guttural. His eyes were empty now, drained of arrogance, filled only with the weight of realization. "You don't understand what we've done." They had not gone to war with an empire or a coalition of greedy expansionists. They had declared war on a species that had spent its entire history fighting just to survive. A species that did not conquer because it did not need to. A species that, when faced with extinction, did not bargain. It removed the threat. Chancellor Zervana sat motionless at the end of the table, the glow from the war map casting deep shadows across her face. For the first time in her long rule, she looked truly afraid. Carvos inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. This was not a war that could be won. This was a war that had already ended. The only question left was how long it would take for the council to realize it. The Grand Assembly Hall was silent, not the kind of silence that came with order and authority, but the kind that preceded collapse. The once mighty Galactic Council, the architects of interstellar law, now sat in shambles. Where once stood dignitaries in brilliant robes of office, there were now nervous figures, weary and haggard, their ceremonial garb reduced to mere remnants of a power that no longer existed. Zervana's fingers curled around the arms of her throne, her grip tight enough to crack the polished wood beneath. The weight of failure pressed down on her, a burden heavier than any crown. She had ruled for centuries, overseen wars and treaties, crushed insurrections with calculated precision. Yet now, she was powerless. Before her, a single human stood, Supreme Admiral Victor Hale. His uniform was crisp, black with silver embellishments, adorned not with medals of victory, but with the quiet authority of a man who needed no decoration. He had no guards, no soldiers flanking him. He stood alone because he had no reason to be afraid. Behind him, the towering windows of the Grand Assembly Hall framed a sight that no one in the chamber could bear to look at. Humanity's fleet, now fully assembled, hovering above the Council's homeworld. A fleet that had not needed to fire a single shot upon arrival. The last standing forces of the Council had surrendered without resistance, their ships drifting lifeless in orbit, their crews too broken to fight. Zervana swallowed, her throat dry as sand. She had witnessed the fall of empires before, but never her own. "You've won," she said at last, forcing steel into her voice, even as she knew the words were hollow. "Humanity has proven itself. What are your demands?" Hale tilted his head slightly, his gray eyes unreadable. "Demands?" She clenched her jaw. If this was never about conquest, then what was it for? Why fight so ruthlessly if not to claim the galaxy for yourselves? For the first time, the corners of Hale's lips twitched, not in amusement, but something colder. "You declared war on us." Her pulse quickened. She had expected demands for reparations, planetary concessions, perhaps even forced alliances. But something in Hale's voice, something in the way he stood there without triumph, sent a chill through her. "We miscalculated," she admitted. "We underestimated humanity. We—" Hale raised a hand, cutting her off. "You didn't miscalculate. You made a choice. You thought we would break. You thought we would kneel." His voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it, a quiet fury that had nothing to do with politics. "You want to know what happens when humans fight without restraint," he said. "And now you do." Zervana forced herself to straighten. "Then tell me, Admiral, what happens now?" Hale stepped forward, his boots clicking against the marble floor, echoing through the vast, empty hall. "There will be no occupation," he said. "No vassal states. No treaties." The chamber stirred, uncertain murmurs breaking through the suffocating silence. No empire in history had ever won a war and not imposed its will upon the defeated. Zervana narrowed her eyes. "Then why are you here?" Hale's expression remained impassive. "To make sure it never happens again." A ripple of confusion passed through the remaining council members. Carvos, standing at the edges of the chamber, let out a breath, though whether in relief or dread, no one could tell. "Your governance ends today," Hale continued. "There will be no more decrees from this chamber, no more fleets sent to pacify those who refuse your rule, no more dominion disguised as diplomacy." A council member, a trembling figure from the Philian consortium, stepped forward. You can't simply dismantle the council. Chaos will spread across the stars." Hale met his gaze with something close to pity. The council was the chaos. The word struck like a physical blow. Zervana's breath hitched, her carefully controlled demeanor cracking. "But without us," she whispered, "the galaxy will be ungoverned." Hale's eyes darkened. "Then govern yourselves. But humanity will never bow to you again. And if you ever raise a hand against us, if you ever attempt to control what is not yours to rule." He turned his gaze toward the window, toward the sky where the last remnants of the council's power drifted in ruin. "You've already seen what happens." The weight of his words settled over them like a funeral shroud. There was no declaration of conquest, no demands for subjugation. The council had gone to war believing they were invincible, believing they could dictate the terms of history. Now, they would not even be a part of history. Zervana's fingers finally loosened their grip on the throne. She could see it now. The end was not a grand battle or a decisive surrender. It was simply erasure. Humanity had fought not for victory, but for finality. Malik watched from the fringes of the chamber, his old heart heavy. He had warned them. He had spoken the words that should have changed everything. And yet the lesson had come too late. Hale turned, stepping back toward the massive entrance doors, his posture relaxed, as though the greatest war in modern history had never happened. "This is not a treaty," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber one last time. "It's a warning." Then, without another word, he left. No war cries, no celebrations, just the quiet, terrible certainty of an ending. And in the void beyond, humanity's fleet turned away, not as conquerors, but as the final judgment on an era that would never return.